I'm talking about human slavery.
Yeah, that's happening right now. Women lured in via social media and injected with hormones to harvest their eggs. It's a surrogacy and egg farm. A woman who is in a coma and is basically brain dead, she donates her whole body to a surrogacy pregnancy.
Oh my God. People are kept in these tower blocks.
Somebody is getting very rich from this, a very large scale industry. It's about 194 billion. We don't know exactly how many of those are brought in from other countries, so basically trafficked. You give birth and that child is not yours. Lucy Liu once famously referred to her son as a lump of flesh. Kim Kardashian has had 2 children born through surrogacy.
Why is she on a hospital bed?
I mean, that's quite a trend.
What?
In Zhengshuang, she and her boyfriend split up. She basically wanted to get out of the contract and cancel the pregnancies at 8 months.
8 months. Lexi Ellingsworth, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me.
It's a pleasure to have you. We've been in touch for some time, actually, and it's a topic that is a little bit different to what we normally talk about. But after speaking to you, I was like, oh, wow, this is completely insane. And it's something, whatever side you're on, we have to be able to talk about it at least. So first I want to start with asking you about the celebrities, the elites, the people in charge who are not having babies themselves. What's actually going on?
So a lot of celebrities have been having other women have babies for them for quite some time. So Sarah Jessica Parker was probably one of the first. Her and her husband, obviously Matthew Broderick, had a woman in Ohio have twins actually for them. And whether that started the celebrity culture or not, but there's definitely been a sort of uptick. There's been a lot of people who since then have had women have babies for them. So Lucy Liu once famously, sort of fairly flippantly, I think, referred to her son as a lump of flesh because he was sort of like uninteresting as a baby and became more interesting as he grew. She had a surrogate mother have the son for her. Also, I mean, there's just so many. So Nicole Kidman and Keith Urban. There's also been Rebel Wilson has had a child through surrogacy fairly recently. There's also been Elizabeth Banks and her husband. Yeah. And there have been just so many to name. But I mean, Naomi Campbell is another, Cameron Diaz and her husband, Benji Madden. Okay. There's just sort of like lots and lots of people are sort of having this as almost like a trend. And then obviously it comes over into people who aren't, necessarily of that level of wealth. So it's, a very large scale industry. It's about 194 billion. It's expected to reach that sort of level in about 10 years' time.
What, in dollars or something?
In dollars, yeah, across the world, yeah. So just under 200 billion.
How do we even know, like celebrities, are they sort of flaunting this, or is it just the fact that they've got a baby and they never had a bump?
So I think it's a number of things. So Juliana and Bill Rancic, I don't know if you've heard of the name, but they met live on TV. She was an ETV correspondent, presenter, and they met, and she had breast cancer. And so she obviously went through treatment, and they had a boy born from a surrogate mother. And it was documented on a reality TV show. I remember when they asked the surrogate mother if she would do it again, and how it was obviously shown on TV and she was filmed with that question being presented to her right there with the cameras rolling. And it's just sort of very complacent and almost dismissive, and there's some sort of expectation or entitlement in there as well. So, she had obviously had a son for them already. Why would she not do it for them again so that they could have a sibling? What's the problem?
I see. I just remembered right now, and I might be mistaken, but this was a storyline on Friends, wasn't it? Phoebe got pregnant for
her brother. Yeah.
Bit different maybe, but...
Well, not in terms of the risks and the sort of level, the sort of intricacies of the arrangements and the things that are involved. So in that storyline, obviously it's fiction, but she had triplets. So she would have had a multiples pregnancy, which is very risky. Obviously this wasn't portrayed in a sort of light-hearted comedy program, but it's incredibly risky to carry twins, triplets, etc. And when you are introducing in that storyline as well, it was her brother and his wife, who was his teacher, and she was an older lady. So whether, I mean, again, it's a storyline, but whether it would be her eggs or another woman's eggs, either way, these are donor eggs that are being used for a pregnancy, for a multiples pregnancy, and that carries risk. And it would be Phoebe in that storyline who carried that risk.
I see. She was the actress from that 70s show, the brothers'
Yeah,
wife.
she was. I don't know her name.
She seemed much older in that 70s show, but she was older in Friends. That was the sort of the point. And I think you spoke to me before about the Kardashians. They're quite into this as well.
So Kim Kardashian has had 2 children born through surrogacy, and Khloé Kardashian has had 1. So that's more recent, Khloé's son. And she was, again, it was part of the sort of reality TV show. She was shown sort of showing some kind of concern that the surrogate mother might be able to terminate the pregnancy, and that she didn't realise that would be something that was possible, that this woman had, some kind of body autonomy over this situation. And then when the child was born, she went to the hospital, and afterwards she spoke about how transactional, like it was in nature, with her sort of in the next room on a hospital bed, having not given birth or received any medical treatment and not being patient.
Why is she on a hospital bed?
I don't know, to lie down more comfortably. I mean, that's quite a trend.
What?
It's quite a trend. You'll see men lying on a bed, holding a baby that as if they've just given birth, but obviously they haven't.
I'll do that. I'm accused all the time by my wife of sort of getting phantom symptoms.
Oh, really?
Yeah, if it's her time of the month or whatever it might be, I'm also a bit like, gosh, I don't feel.
So you may be seen in future bare-chested with a baby on your chest, having recently given birth. Yeah.
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah.
That chest thing, is there any science behind that? They say that.
So there's different ideas about it, but basically there is this idea skin to skin. However, it's been researched and looked at that when you do it, it's really only with the mother that baby benefits from skin to skin. So obviously a child is born, it's often given to the father, or the other, other people in the room, the other partner, and it's sort of like, the man might be open-chested or with that topless, with a baby on his chest, as if to calm the baby, but they don't recognise that person. They may know the voice if they've been around in pregnancy, but generally speaking, it would be the baby only knows their mother. So obviously if they're on their mother's chest and they're hearing the heartbeat, that's the heartbeat that they've heard in utero. And there's actually some videos that I've seen where in parts of Africa, the baby will essentially crawl up the mother's stomach using their feet to push and get up to breastfeed. And it's because of amniotic fluid and the smell. And, it's like, there's like nature, it's a natural response. Yeah.
I do that with my dog sometimes. I've got a puppy and only because I'm sometimes don't have a t-shirt on. And it made me think, oh God, one day, or maybe my wife said, oh, that'll be with a baby one day. Or because we don't know about all of these things anyway. But then you think about where the dog's feet have been and all of that. You don't really want that. I
mean, how they wash and stuff.
Yes, yeah, that is gross, actually.
I mean, when babies are born, they're covered in muck, and it's, it's a pretty gory process. But maybe you wouldn't want to put them on your chest if you're wearing a white t-shirt. I don't know.
Yeah, there's that as well. And you can throw the white t-shirt away.
Yeah, sure.
But this is a subject I don't know very much about. So I want to, from my perspective, I'm looking at this and going, okay, well, these are. We have an issue where women, but just biologically, have to give birth. I mean, they don't have to, but they, it's this whole thing, and it's really difficult and grueling and hard, but lovely and wonderful as well, I'm sure.
Sure.
Men don't have to have that, and so men get to advance in their careers, and women do not. So I suppose that is the argument. Like, how is this fair? And is surrogacy not a way to create, at least with that, some more fairness between the sexes?
Well, it's not the male sex who are surrogate mothers.
No. So
they're women, and they would be used, quote unquote, for that purpose. So it's because of that. There is a difference between the sexes, as you say, because it's only women who give birth. So in order for some people to have a family, they consider this their natural route. Maybe it's through infertility problems or the inconvenience of pregnancy as well. I mean, that's been a possibility in several sort of celebrity surrogacy arrangements, as we've discussed. So, for example, Priya Chopra and Nick Jonas, they spoke about having busy schedules and not being able to conceive. And, you might think if you're quite busy to schedule sexual relations with your other half, you might be a bit busy in order to raise a child. So I think actually Priya Chopra has taken a year off work or some time off work. But there's basically, it can be seen as an inconvenience. And so you then outsource it to somebody else. And so with that, you outsource the risks. And it's always women who bear those risks. So whilst it might be a way to carry on with your career and not be held back, there's a very sort of real physical reality whether, there's a child at the end of it. And I think we should always prioritize that rather than what the adults concerned might prefer as a matter of convenience.
That's interesting. I suppose then they would say, wait, how is it done then? So it's just the conception part. Okay, so obviously that does the man sort of go in a tube and or is it done with like a syringe or something?
So there's two different types of surrogacy in terms of like how the pregnancy is conceived. So there's gestational surrogacy where, and even that I don't like the phrase, but basically that will be where an embryo is implanted. So like an IVF pregnancy, whether that egg comes from the woman who's going to be pregnant or whether that egg comes from another woman. Obviously, if there's two men involved, they'll need an egg from somewhere. Again, nature, that's just how it's done. And then there's another type of surrogacy where the surrogate mother herself she provides the egg in the pregnancy by conceiving in a more natural way in terms of it being through artificial insemination. So that obviously then doesn't involve clinics or safeguarding or anything relating to that, but you can just do that at home with syringes. Yeah. And that can be with the donation.
Is it sort of syringe, but for the sperm?
Yeah.
It all sounds a bit horrible. Okay, so that
could be the DIY version. So that's often chosen as a cheaper option because it doesn't involve clinics. It doesn't involve the creation of the embryo. And then obviously that woman is the genetic and birth mother. I mean, so a woman-in-law, a woman who gives birth is the mother. That's in UK law. But she's also then giving away her genetic child, and that child could be related to her other children, whether she's had other children or will have future children.
That's interesting. I think, again, I guess the people doing this, another argument they would say is, okay, well, these as you say, these women are in some respects having to shoulder the burden of having the child, but they signed up to it. They're being paid handsomely, and that's capitalism. But would you say that these women don't entirely know what they're signing up to? Is that what it is? I
think there's an idea that people who are anti-surrogacy sort of infantilize women and say, oh, they don't know what they're doing. For me, that's not the case. I think it's actually more complicated than that. I think there are significant motivating factors that we need to take into account. So that can be financial aspects. That can be, I've heard of situations where a woman has had a baby for her sister because her sister gave her, did her a favor once or helped her out or even, gave her a kidney or, things like that. There can be situations where a woman does it for her friend and you can have it as, well, what happens if you change your mind, for example? What happens with that friendship at that point? What if you find that the pregnancy is really difficult and actually you want to terminate the pregnancy? How could you do that when that's your best friend, your cousin, your sister's like last chance to have a genetic child, if that's the connection, if that's the case with an egg donor conceived pregnancy? And then, to be honest, I think it's even a layer of it comes from what I would call, and actually what a surrogate mother said to me once, is about toxic femininity. And so this desire to help, or this expectation, these social expectations to help, we should be, we have so-called altruistic surrogacy here in the UK. We're not meant to have commercial surrogacy. Obviously, large amounts of money change hands. But if it's altruistic and it's sort of like you're doing it out of the goodness of your heart, then, would you ask somebody to to take that risk for you? Would you ask your best friend? Would you expect that of somebody else? You know, you can have, obviously, there's lots of people in this world who have infertility. I think the WHO say I think it's 1 in 6. I think it's 1 in 5 or 1 in 6 globally.
Women?
Yeah, well, couples. So
does it tend to be women, or is it men as well? As often?
So in the UK, it's more or less split half and half between same-sex couples and heterosexual couples. So obviously,
okay. No, but I just meant infertility in general.
Yeah, but I mean, infertility. So, I mean, 2 gay men, they're not necessarily infertile.
No, I understand. Yeah.
But it's sort of, you know, in fact, some of them are sperm donors themselves.
Yeah. I'm
or
just
have children.
About myself. I haven't been tested or anything.
I mean, it's more common now these days than it was, I don't know, maybe 20, 30 years ago. But I mean, globally, if we're talking about like large numbers of people having this, are we saying that the next thing they can do in their infertility journey or their fertility journey is have another woman involved as a third party to give them a baby? Because apart from anything else, it doesn't solve the infertility. The infertility is not solved.
Is it that woman's baby? Because is their sort of egg is put into, so it's still
so you can have it whether you're genetically related or not, but the thing is that the woman always gives birth, so of course it's her baby because she's carried that child. There's a lot of ideas around in the surrogacy community, if we're calling it that when you have a baby through surrogacy, that baby's not yours. And I think there's a bit of a sort of like mind switch in the head where you're sort of talking about yourself as an incubator and referring to yourself as such. So, for example, I've seen it where women who talk about the children that they haven't given away, they call them keepers because they've kept them.
I see.
And then the children, when they're pregnant with a child for somebody else, they'll say they are extreme babysitting, as if it's an extreme sport of some kind, like it's extreme babysitting. It's kind of like a really evolved form of childcare.
And that child then, because I struggle with these things, that child is not actually related to the woman that is giving birth to it.
They may or may not, like I say, so it depends on whether it's gestational or traditional surrogacy. But the thing is that they're always related a little bit because of mitochondrial DNA. So, for example, your mum has your cells in her body.
Disgusting.
And you have her cells in yours. They're transferred via the placenta and they're found decades later. So It's fascinating, actually. It's a really interesting topic. It's called microfetal microchimerism. So it's fetal microchimerism. So it's basically a swapping of cells in the body. It's not DNA as such because it's not that genetic connection, but it's still cells that are in your body for years and years later.
Is it often the case then that women who were recipients for that they change their minds and grow attached to the baby and want to keep it?
That can happen, and it can happen the other way around, where actually the commissioning couple or
I've read stories about that, actually. I just remember, maybe it was something you wrote, like I'm talking a long time ago. I've definitely read something about, there was somebody was saying, hey, they want it, and then in the last minute, the celebrity couple didn't want the baby anymore. Oh
yeah, so you might be thinking of Zhang Shuang. She's a celebrity, so she's an actress. So she and her boyfriend split up. This isn't the only occasion. This happens actually more often than you'd think, but it's sort of a well-known example because she's an actress. So she split up with her boyfriend, and she was recorded, I think, expressing frustration or anger that she couldn't terminate the 2 pregnancies because she had 2 women at the same time. That's called simultaneous surrogacy, where you have one and then another, possibly as a backup, possibly for 2 at once.
Oh my God.
Like twins, but not. So they call them twiblings, like siblings and twins, but not. Anyway, she basically wanted to get out of the contract and cancel the pregnancies and the children, the babies, at 8 months.
8 months? Mm-hmm. So she just wanted to kill her own...
She wanted to have them aborted, yeah.
And because abortion's another topic.
Well, I wouldn't refer to it as, exactly. But I mean, at 8 months, and they were very close to giving birth, and that was illegal because they were in America, so they were not able to, it wasn't legal to do it. But she expressed some frustration and was recorded doing so. And then I think the boyfriend actually, is the dad. He's the genetic father and is raising the children.
So this is her own genetics. It's her own daughter? Or we don't know?
I don't think we know.
I
think it's possible. I think so. I think it is.
Then it's a woman wanting to kill her, basically her baby.
Or basically cancel the contract and not have these children born, and
kill them at that stage. And that's not an abortion issue. I mean, I think I'm pro-choice or whatever, but at 8 months, you're talking about
exactly.
the baby.
I mean, it's obviously not possible it's not possible to do it legally around the world. That is not a legal abortion. That's an illegal abortion.
But it shows the distance that is created when it's
exactly. So it's kind of like this is a. So I think in that situation, and I'm only imagining this because obviously I can't imagine, I don't know what went through this woman's head, but as she ended her relationship, this whole setup that she had where they were very much deliberately commissioning the births of 2 children in order to presumably be a family altogether, they split up and that was no longer what she wanted in her future. So she simply changed her mind.
Oh my God. So that's the issue. One of the issues, people changing their minds. I guess also just the idea, and we'll get onto the fact that it's not just celebrities and elites, of course, this is happening everywhere. Well, in fact, no, we can go to that because in any case, there's always going to be a power imbalance, isn't there? So even if it's just some middle-class family or even lower middle-class family, they're paying somebody who doesn't presumably have as much means as they do. So it creates this kind of 2-tier system, does it?
There is a power imbalance, but to go back to your question about surrogate mothers changing their minds, they do. However, when it comes to the child being born, it's not as simple as saying, oh, well, I'm going to keep the child now. Like, sorry, but the deal's off. Like, this isn't happening. You end up in court because, obviously the child may or may not be related to you. And you need to go through the process of getting legal representation and going to court. So there's a surrogate mother who we supported through at least part of that process because she had already started it when we met. But she had a surrogacy pregnancy where the child was conceived with her egg. So it was an artificial insemination situation. It was after some other things had happened and they had met through an agency. And then she continued with the pregnancy. She felt like she was not going to be in the child's life. She had strong feelings that the couple who she was having this baby for were going to, basically, they weren't the best of friends as she thought. And she was reluctant to sign the parental order. She did eventually sign it under judicial pressure and, I think the official term is judicial encouragement. And she went to court and then later won in a sort of unprecedented legal ruling in the UK. Because
otherwise you've got a situation where you end up having to give away your own genetic child that you've just given birth to.
That's what she had done.
Because of a mistake you made or because, you've signed something a year before.
Yeah.
And now you're going, no, actually, this is my kid.
She basically changed her mind and wanted the option. So there's a really strong theme of consent that takes place in surrogacy for me. So you have to have full and informed consent in the law in the UK. But a judge can dispense with your consent as well. And there's been some really interesting cases in the UK where the surrogate mother has been overseas and basically she can't be found. So just recently on our Twitter, we spoke about a case where it was a couple who had roots in Nigeria and the surrogate mother was there and she was faceless or invisible. So whenever she was shown on scans remotely, like no one saw her face or, she was literally kind of like this invisible woman. And then in the court ruling, her name she had to have a signature and it was just her initials that were on the documents. And in the UK, you have to make sure that the consent is given freely and it's fully informed. And because they didn't know her name and they couldn't find her in the clinic in Nigeria, were saying, oh, we don't know where she is. And this was all above board and it's all okay. Basically, the judge dispensed with the requirement of consent in that situation and granted the parental order to the parents. And they were a heterosexual couple. And it was very interesting what they said because they basically said, because they made a statement, it was in the court ruling, that they didn't want to have to have contact with her. They didn't want to be sort of beholden to the mother of their child. They wanted to take the child and go and presumably pretend to the child that the woman in that couple was the mother and not this other woman in Nigeria.
Why was this woman faceless? Because that started making me think, okay, are there women who may be held and made to sort of trade babies? And I'm talking about human slavery.
Yeah, I mean, that's happening. That's happening right now. There was an expose by the Daily Mail just recently in Georgia. So it was a surrogacy and egg farm. So women basically lured in via social media and injected with hormones to harvest their eggs. That's just one situation. Julie Bindle's covered this really extensively over the years. It's not exactly common, but I would say that since I've been doing this, there have been more humans trafficking scandals in surrogacy reported globally more frequently. So when I started back in 2019, there was like one or two, and I think in 2023 and 4, I think I've counted about 6 or 7. So that's Greece, Argentina, Vietnam, Cambodia, Spain. And, you know, it's happening all the time.
Is this children being raised for organ harvesting?
I don't know. I don't think so. I think it is to do with people wanting to have families and get a child from overseas because maybe they're not able to get one any other route. And it's not something that, you know, should be popularized. And so there's arguments that basically if you don't legalize it, you know, in a country, then it will be on the black market and people will do it anyway. But for example, in Italy, they had a law in place for 20 years. And it was only recently that was expanded to criminalize the act of bringing a child into the country from abroad who's been born through surrogacy. And that's been talked about as if it's a right-wing move. But I mean, this law was in place for 20 years. It's just that people flouted the law. And so now it's a fight. You can be fined up to €1 million if you do it.
Why was this associated with the right?
Because of that government.
Oh, right.
That leads, Giorgia Meloni.
Outside of that, is it seen as a sort of...
I'm not sure. I mean, I think possibly because of sort of like family values, and people think, you know, it's to do with this... traditional, heteronormative kind of, this is, you know, heterosexual couples, but it's not. It's a mixture. And then maybe it's seen as an attack on LGBT and the T, perhaps. I mean, it's not really... There, like I think I said to you before we met today, that there is a case last month of this lesbian couple who got twins from northern Cyprus, and that's quite unusual to have 2 women. It's mostly 2 men or heterosexual couples.
That's interesting. I get, do lesbians often sort of find a guy and sort of extract their sperm?
I mean, I don't think they do it themselves.
Yeah.
I think he offers
syringe,
sure. I mean, there's that process which could be done with heterosexual couples if the woman is having, you know, if the man has infertility issues with his sperm, then, you know, that's a sperm donor, basically a known sperm donor. A lot of that happens on Facebook. You'd be surprised.
I can't believe people donate their sperm. You know what? It's something I always knew happened, obviously.
Yeah.
And I'm sure it makes many families happy. So I'm not saying it's all entirely a bad thing or a good thing or whatever. It suddenly just dawned on me what that actually means. Yeah. And I can imagine being like 20 and thinking, I could do with an extra bit of, you know, 20 quid or whatever they give you.
I mean, it was happening back in, let me think, probably the 70s where, so there was, so there were women who basically were involved in organising this, and men who were sort of like students of Oxford University or the local university would go and donate in the manner of which we know how that happens. And then women would they would go through the back door and the women would come in the front door, and it was sort of arranged in a very informal way. And clinics, so I mean, that happens, it happens more with the internet and people meeting on Facebook and things like that. But there are organisations, or I would count them as businesses because I'm sure they charge membership fees, that they organise, so they basically get people matching through their
Oh, wow.
In the same way that surrogacy agencies do. So you sign up as a member and you will be connected with women who will be surrogate mothers. And then the same with sperm donors. Like, you can sign up to an agency and say you're looking for a sperm donor. And then based on your criteria and what you're looking for, which is normally superficial, in terms of looks.
Yeah.
So eye colour, hair colour, height, and maybe something about their level of intelligence or sporting abilities, and then being matched with somebody.
And they set a different price depending on,
Not in this country, no, I don't believe. But I mean, if you look at the egg donor industry, there's a really excellent book I'd like to mention. It's Dr. Diane Tober. It's called Economics is what it's called. And it's a very detailed look. It was a long study that she did looking at the US and Spain. And it's really... I mean, even for me, it was shocking, and I've been doing this for a long time. So, women are basically valued on their appearance, their intellect, their qualifications, or if they're in an Ivy League university, and their sort of athletic ability. And we might think about how that doesn't necessarily apply in the UK, but I know of I guess they're a celebrity couple there, Ollie Locke and his husband, who's also called... So they're made in Chelsea.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
And it was in a podcast where they said that they chose their egg donor based on the fact that she was smoking hot.
Oh.
And she was an egg donor in America. So, of course, you can go abroad. You can get eggs from here, there, everywhere. You can get them from poor women in Ukraine or Russia. You can get them from young women where they've been...
That American smoking hot woman presumably would have cost more.
Yeah. She would have cost more money.
But the thing is, once you open the doors to what is a very capitalistic exchange, the ultimate of just like, we will use your body in exchange for money, then, well, of course that's going to happen.
Yes.
And if you were, I know you're against surrogacy, of course, but if you were going to do it, you would want a child who comes from good stock, so to speak.
Yeah, there is that. And there's the idea that women who are egg donors, they can pay for their college fees, their university fees. They can set themselves up financially. There's also the idea there's agencies that will specifically go and look for particular traits. So in this book, I remember a story of obviously they were, a couple or a single person who went to an agency who they wanted to have a child who was musical. So I think they found an egg donor a woman who was a cellist or something like that. And it's like they wanted to have a particularly, almost like a genius child.
Yeah, virtuoso.
Yeah, and that's what they were looking for. And it's really quite bizarre to think of the scale that this is happening now, because obviously it wasn't like this a few years ago, even just a few years ago. And that's just the egg donor market. And then the sperm donor market in the UK. So it can be done obviously really informally. And I don't know if you've seen on Netflix, there's two quite good documentaries. There's one called Our Father, which is about, I call them God doctors.
Right.
So basically they are fertility doctors who have used their own sperm to get women pregnant, to impregnate them, and then they do this multiple times, and they do this through their business, through their work, through their fertility clinics.
Transparently?
No.
They were doing it as... So this was Simon Evans. Do you know who he is? The comedian, GB News... Bald little eyes.
Yeah.
He said he does a routine about his eyes being really, because he sort of closes his eyes and you can't see them anymore. Okay. Small little eyes. But he said he didn't realize there was a Jewish fella, and I say he's Jewish not because we should attack him, because I'm Jewish, but I must have been, I don't know how old he is, but it must have been in the 60s or whatever, who was supposed to be helping women with fertility stuff, but he was using his own sperm and had thousands of his babies. And Simon realized when he was like 50 odd, I think, or 40 odd, that he was one of them. And it turns out he's like, I'm Jewish. Right. But So
it's Dr. Donald Klein that I'm thinking of, but there's others that are, there's about 8 names of doctors in the fertility industry who have done this. And actually it's not really that unusual.
Bertold Wiesner?
That's not a name I recognise. Okay. I'm trying to think of the other ones. But there's a law, I think, in Florida where this was criminalised because of how many there were.
I see. That's mad. So there must be a particular type of guy who's got, I don't know if it's either a fetish or just he wants his own.
Well, the other one I was going to mention, so the other documentary is called A Man with 1,000 Kids.
Yeah.
And that's Jacob Mayer. And he's basically this prolific sperm donor, flies around the world doing it. He lied to everyone who he donated to, saying that he only had, 4 children, when actually he has quite a lot more than that. And I think the number is unknown, but I think he's been, I think he is the first man to be banned from donating. So he was donating through clinics and then donating independently. And it's just the nature of, so obviously you don't do this with egg donation, but with sperm donation, like you can literally go around the world and donate physically and do this at a certain time of the month for the woman who wants to use that sperm and get pregnant. And he was a really popular donor. But what's interesting is that there were several of them who were featured in the documentary, and one of them said that they said something like to bleach Africa.
Wait, what? The one of these guys who was doing that, he was trying to get as many white kids to be in Africa. Yeah.
So there's very racist connotations, and in the other documentary, it was to do with religious ideas of the more children you have, the closer you are to God.
Oh, well, that's a big thing.
Yeah,
I've seen that in. I went to some event in the States, and there's Americans I met, and there's this guy. I think he's got 5. And he was a very nice fella, but he wants to have 13 or so, I think. And him and his wife are setting up a kind of group of only intellectuals and things like them, so that those kids will only socialize with the other kids from this, which to me, I thought this is a bit of a cult, isn't it? But bloody hell. But the other thing at this event, this was in the States somewhere, was what doctors are doing now to mess with the intelligence and things like that of babies before they're born.
So that's genetic engineering, right?
Right.
Yeah. So on the numbers of children, so there's a couple in Georgia. So he's Turkish and she's Russian, and they've got 22 children and they want to have 100. So 22 children born through surrogacy.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
And I think surrogate women?
Oh, yeah. Well, so they're born all at the same time as well. So it's kind of like within, I don't know, you might have quite a few within the space of a year. But he's been arrested and his assets frozen. So I don't know what might be happening with their plan to have 100. But then there's another one. There's a Japanese businessman who had 13 children with Thai surrogate mothers, and he got parental rights to all of them. That seemed to be motivated, to me at least, by some sort of political desire to have some sort of political dynasty. But then Elon Musk has had 2 children through surrogacy, and he's got 14 now. That was announced just the other day. And he obviously is perhaps working to single-handedly manage the decline in birth rates that he speaks of.
He's such a funny one, isn't he? And I mean funny as in odd, because I don't think he is very funny. And that's a shame, because I'm happy to have sort of lowbrow humour, highbrow humour. I don't really care. But he reminds me sometimes of that Simpsons episode. You ever watch Simpsons back in the day?
Yeah.
And I think it's based in the Twilight Zone. And when Bart Simpson is, he can turn people into things by like blinking his eyes.
Oh, okay.
And so everybody is like so nice to him, and they all walk around going, "Oh yes, Bart," and Bart turns Homer into a Jack in the Box or something just by blinking at him.
And do you think he's a bit like Bart Simpson in that way that?
Yeah, 20-30 years of everybody going yes. I mean, we're all incentivized to do it, because if I could, and I'm not just criticizing Elon, if you're listening, I think you're wonderful in so many other respects as well, because he could block your Twitter profile, your reach and all of those things, and everybody's concerned about that. But I saw him on Joe Rogan the other day, and he was showing Joe how his AI bot can swear, and Joe's sitting there at first politely smiling along, and I think after some time just sort of like, when you've got a child, I know he's on the spectrum and it's all a bit, but that thing with the kids.
I say single-handedly. Obviously, he's not doing it single-handedly.
Well, yes.
I don't want to think about where his hands are. But anyway, there are lots of women involved in that. I mean, there's obviously the women that he's having relationships with, multiple relationships with, and ex-wives and things, and the women who are being commissioned to have children for him.
And we spoke about the traditional sort of the right the right-wing traditional family unit kind of thing. So I get the side of, I need to have more kids and solve the population problem. But then the family unit just seems to be non-existent in his life.
I mean, I just think that, well, that's true, because it's obviously not that capsule, I suppose, the family sort of capsule of, 2.4 kids or whatever. He's got 14.
Yeah, in how many of their lives is he? Maybe he is more present than I realise. I mean, I'm not following him every day.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not either, to be honest. I don't really have much to say about him, but it's just, I think it's interesting where... So I think it's this idea of a woman having to... So when he talks about a decline in birth rates, is it then a woman's job to resolve this? And when we're talking about altruistic surrogacy, like, a woman has to help other women, and it's actually recommended by doctors sometimes. Fertility doctors will say, well, look, we can't really do anything else to help you. Have you got a sister or a cousin or something?
Wow.
And it's suggested as a solution, like I say, when the infertility remains, but obviously the ultimate goal is to have a baby. So you just bring in a third party, and if she's willing to do it because she wants to help, then I think we have to look at why. I don't think it's as simple as saying, oh, well, she's okay with it. Because she might well be okay with it, but the women that we speak to, who we hear from, it's not like a lifetime thing. Like, you might change your mind. You might feel differently about it when the baby's born. You might feel differently about it when the baby's 3 years old. The UK's youngest surrogate mother has spoken about, she was really young. She was a single mom when she was 19, and she had triplets when she was 21 for this other couple, they're a British couple. It was arranged with an agency in California, if I remember rightly. But she has said that she hasn't seen them since they were littles, like since they were really, really young. And I mean, they're a heterosexual couple. So will they tell them? Will they tell the children, these 3 little kids who are, I think they're nearly teenagers now, that they came from another woman? I mean, she's not in their lives, so how would they know? There's a surrogate mother in the UK who has had a second baby. So this is where it's her own egg. So she's had 2. And she fell out with the first couple. They're a heterosexual couple because she was talking about surrogacy and they wanted to be more private. And then, so they're no longer in touch. And she said, oh, well, this little boy can find me. He can come and find me. I mean, the secret of where he comes from is in his own cells, but how would he know to go looking if he isn't told? Because the parents are a heterosexual couple, like I say, they don't have to tell him, because he's not going to be... It's not as if when he goes to school and learns about biology and you have 2 dads or 2 mums, you're going to know that there was another person involved at some point to create you, to make you possible. But when it's a heterosexual couple, they can obviously just never mention it again.
Yeah, it's a minefield, isn't it? How prevalent is this in the UK, say, and what is the legal status?
So there's roughly 450 to 500 babies born every year through surrogacy. We don't know exactly how many of those are brought in from other countries, so basically trafficked. And we don't know how many of them are born here, but it's probably roughly 50-50 based on numbers that we do have. But with the law as it is right now, there's no change. However, the law reform proposals would be suggesting that this should be liberalised and made easier. And even though they recognise the level of exploitation involved in international commercial surrogacy, there's no plan to prevent that from happening in the law reform proposals. So there's 2 pathways. They're calling the one that they're introducing the new pathway, which is where which is the reform proposal. So it's sort of supposedly seeking to make it more popular and easier to do here so that people don't have to go abroad. But the other pathway remains, and that's the parental order pathway. So the new pathway, critically, would have parental rights for the commissioning couple at birth. And that hasn't been done in this country before. It is done in the commercial model in other countries. But what that would be doing is saying that you give birth, you're a woman and you're giving birth, and that child is not yours. So literally at birth.
That's something.
Yeah, that changes something in the law about who it is who gives birth. Because in another law that we have, it says that the woman who gives birth is the mother and no other. So I think those conflict. And then the thing is that if you do change your mind, you have up to 6 weeks to lodge, basically like put together a legal team and submit an application to get a parental order for your own child, the child that you gave birth to like 6 weeks before. And if you do that, they're not going to give the baby back to you. You're going to go to court, as you do now, if you change your mind. So there's only ever, like we were talking about the power and the power dynamic and the imbalance, all of the power is in the hands of the commissioning parents.
It seems to be the case. And I think you were mentioning, BBC reporters, and it's not only the domain of the Kardashians and those.
Yeah, so it's not that like it's nearly $200 billion in the next 10 years, and that's not from just the super rich, obviously the Elon Musks and the Khloé Kardashians of this world. It's actually much more at a lower level. Like it's just easier for people to do it because they can go to Ukraine and get a baby. It could be lots of money that they pay to the agency, but the surrogate mother might not get that much. And you can have, obviously people do it for you here in this country. It's just the other day I was speaking to somebody who works for a streaming TV service, and he was explaining to me that somebody who he works with is getting a baby from Ukraine. It's, Mark Lowen at the BBC is the Rome correspondent. I think he has 2 children from Canada, from a Canadian surrogate mother.
And so do they sort of get like flown over? You have to fly over to Canada?
You fly over to Canada and you get the papers and then you leave with the baby and the passport, all travel documents, yeah.
So would you just totally outlaw surrogacy?
Yeah, I would, if it was up to me. So I think based on it's never safe, it's not ethical, you can't do it ethically, even if people agree, you have to think about why, what's going on behind the scenes, what's their motivation for it. There was a short documentary series on BBC that's no longer on iPlayer, but we've got a review of it on our website, and it was called The Surrogates. And I think it's really fascinating what those women there were sharing about why they were doing it. So there was a woman in a lesbian couple, and she had children obviously through sperm donation, so she was sort of paying it forward. There was another woman who was a social worker, and she seemed to do it to prove that she was a good person, like to prove to herself that she was a good person. And then there was a young woman who I remember distinctly, her name's Emma, and she was a single mother. And her story struck me in particularly because she spoke about how it healed her from suicidal thoughts. And I think there's a lot that goes on. And again, it's sort of like saying, you're infantilizing them. They can make up their own minds. But should we not be checking why? Like they have some kind of psychological assessment when it's organised through agencies and sometimes independently as well. But they're never asking about why. They're more asking about, are you going to be able to give the baby up? And it's sort of like, why are we not looking? Because it's not therapy. It's just kind of like a tick box exercise to make sure that there will be the baby at the end will be handed over and they will be mentally robust enough to be able to do that. It's not looking at why they did that. We know that from surrogate mothers who've spoken to us, who've been through the implications counselling process. So,
yeah, from what you've told, I feel quite torn listening, and that's why it's an intriguing topic as well. I understand your point, and it's more dangerous. It leaves the women giving birth vulnerable, and at the same time, I know there'll be people watching this who go, well, we had a surrogacy birth. That woman we know is happy. She was able to, as you said, put herself through college and all of those things. She's not actually related to the baby. It's our baby in this case. Can we imagine our life without this child? This child wouldn't be in the world right now. Can you see that argument as well?
I can see the argument. I've heard it plenty of times. I think the thing is that I will always prioritize or center the child and the surrogate mother. So we've heard from surrogate mothers, and it's actually been in plenty of articles from women who still support surrogacy and proponents for surrogacy in law reform. And they say that they did it because they were lonely and that they wanted friendships, in this BBC documentary.
Do they regret it then afterwards?
No, well, whether they some don't. I mean, the ones that I speak, there are women who I've spoken to who do regret it and were motivated to be kind and to help others and to have lifelong friendships and even have almost like a new family, because it's sort of like an extended family of your own. So maybe as a single mother, you want looking for male role models for your son. So also in that documentary that I mentioned, there was a woman who spoke about doing surrogacy for a second time. It was all filmed. And she had a particular sort of situation where she'd lost friends in her life, and she wanted to almost like secure friendship. And she speaks about what she can do for this couple. Like, she knows what she can do for them, but what can they do for me? And kind of like, it's quite transactional, but in a different way, not on money, but based on sort of friendship. Like, they're never going to drop her like her other friends did because you had a baby for them. So it's not transactional in that sort of pure sense of money changing hands, although money did, but it's also, you know, what do I get out of it? And I think we need to look more at the motivations of where those women are coming from. Yeah, I mean, there's all research and exploration into this is based on pro-surrogacy academics here in the UK. The medical side of things, as I spoke about the risks, you know, being 3 times the risk. So that Canadian study was 863,000 births, and they looked at it for the course of about 10 years. There was increased risk in surrogacy pregnancy for preeclampsia, postpartum hemorrhage, preterm birth and C-sections. And this supports previous studies that have been done. But on the sort of social science side, it's looking at how much money they're getting paid. Like, is it reasonable expenses? 'Cause that's what it's meant to be in the UK, or is it more than that? And what their household income is. And then the women that they're speaking to are surrogate mothers who are happy about their experience, but they don't speak to the women that we speak to, who tell us about how it's destroyed them.
And then it's about to what extent do we allow people to make terrible mistakes?
Exactly.
To what extent do we intervene?
Yeah, and how many women do we sacrifice to this, or how many women do we say, look, most of them are okay, some of them are okay. What does it need to be? 50%, 10%? How many are we okay with?
Yeah.
And then that's just the women. Obviously, then there's the children to think of too.
Yeah. But I guess, then, you know, things like loaning money to friends, like, that's also not advisable. It can end friendships and things like that. But to what extent do we outlaw it, or do we allow people to make their own mistakes?
I think, you know, that's money, so that's not a person, that's not a human being. I think that when we think about it in terms of putting the child at the centre, it's actually pretty difficult to argue for, because you're taking a child away from the mother at birth in every surrogacy pregnancy, whether that woman's been paid reasonable expenses, whether she's been paid 15,000, you know, that's roughly between about 15 and 20,000 pounds is sort of almost the going rate. Whether she's paid $60,000 for twins in America, whether she's paid £9,000 worth of Ukrainian currency. You know, what are we saying here? Are we saying that you can buy babies? Because that is what it is. Well,
and there's also, you were telling me about this, there is some level of forced surrogacy.
Yeah, so in the UK, it's quite interesting. This hasn't happened before, but a modern slavery line called Unseen, they reported last year in their sort of annual report that there were 3 cases of forced surrogacy. And obviously there's the human trafficking scandals that I spoke about earlier. And, you know, whether these women are lured in by promises via social media, or whether they've been moved across borders, or wherever these women have come from, they are being used to reproduce, to have children for somebody else. Somebody is getting very rich from this. They're paying money left hand over fist. And I mean, for example, there was something in the Irish Independent today looking at Biotech.com, which is a large Ukrainian surrogacy agency. And the owner of that, I think he's the owner and CEO, he said, Dennis Herman is his name, and he said, we would be being dishonest if we said that these women are doing it for altruistic purposes. So, they're saying that it isn't altruistic. They are doing it for money. A woman who is a surrogate mother in that article refers to it as a job with benefits. Are we saying that motherhood, it's not motherhood, is it? Because it's pregnancy and labour, and that can be monetized because that's what's happening.
Well, also, especially with the forced surrogacy, this idea, there are a lot of places I remember reading about. There's all these schemes and things in East Asia where people are sort of kept in these tower blocks and forced into prostitution and all that. So, it wouldn't surprise me if there was all sorts of women having to have babies and being forced to.
Yeah, that is what's happening, yeah.
Absolutely horrific. I want to ask you about the concept of test tube babies or babies born in a bag, because in many respects, and I don't think you're going to agree with this, but in many respects, that's a solution of sorts, because then the woman doesn't have to go through this. Couples, whether they're gay or straight and just infertile, it can all be done in this sort of bag. No, it's not ideal. It's not very traditional. It's not the picture we have of birth and things, but is that a solution? Is that happening on the horizon?
I worry about what sort of world we would be living in if some of the science around this really progresses to the nth degree. There's some things that are already happening that are concerning. So it's been in the news recently about these 2 dad mice, these mice that have been developed from stem cells. And it's kind of interesting if you read the articles about them, because the fact that there was a female mouse who actually had the pregnancy and birth of the mouse pups, as they're called, is mentioned sort of like really far down the article, like it's kind of the last point made in the press release, and no one sort of bothered to mention that these 2 dad mice actually did involve a female mouse, as if she's invisible as well. And I think there's some scary science happening. I don't want to say Frankenscience and give it a sort of tabloidy name, but I think there's a concept that was developed by, I think she's a Norwegian academic. It's called whole body gestational surrogacy. Okay, so this is the idea that a woman who is in a coma and is basically brain dead, she donates her whole body to a surrogacy pregnancy.
Oh my God.
So she's comatose, okay, and she would be implanted so that her body can be useful because she's still alive and she's not doing anything else. And this is based on the principle because it's happened before where a woman had a pregnancy when she was actually raped and she was in a hospital. It was in Brazil, I think. And so a baby was born almost to full term, I think. But obviously she didn't have any pain meds. Like, it wasn't known that she was pregnant. This idea that, you could keep a woman alive for the purposes of reproduction, not having any consent or anything like that. But it would be too expensive. Her organs would shut down. And it was, it's not necessarily a feasible option. But it's a concept that has been spoken of in academic terms. And you also have womb transplants, obviously womb transplants going into men, so that they can be mothers.
Wait, how does that work?
Well, it wouldn't.
Oh, but they've spoken about it.
It's spoken about, yeah.
So sort of a C-section, they'd have to have a C-section.
So it would be, so womb transplants between women have happened and they have resulted in a live birth. However, the anti-rejection drugs you can't take forever because it's a donated organ, and then it has to be removed after pregnancy and labour. Puts an enormous strain on a woman's body, and it would be, a matter of where did that womb come from to start with? Is it that a friend of yours, or is that sort of somebody else? And then there's the idea, it hasn't ever been practiced, or at least when it was practiced, it ended up, Lily Elba was the example. He died. So it's the idea and the potential practice of a womb going from a woman into a man.
Oh,
so
I did hear about this.
Yeah.
Go on, sorry.
And that, how would that work? because your whole body is used in pregnancy. It's not just your womb. So obviously, like the calcium from your bones, is forming the baby's skeleton. You have the mitochondrial DNA, as I spoke about. Like, it's just sort of crazy ideas. And I don't know where this will go in the future, but if we're talking about babies being born in bags, like Dolly the sheep, in terms of how so Dolly the sheep was created from the nucleus of an egg, and then fertilized. And that was, like a really big scientific story back in the day. But since then, it's been done on humans because there's a doctor called He Jiankui. He basically broke international code by creating twin girls, genetically engineering them so the gene for HIV would be eradicated. And he went to prison for 3 years because of this. He's been freed, and he's now running his own lab, doing experiments on mice, monkey embryos, and non-viable human embryos.
It's weird. It's a weird world.
Yeah, and it's kind of like, who's looking at this? Who's regulating this? Who's making sure this is in the realms of what we accept as a society? There's different organisations working behind the scenes.
But imagine I could just imagine a world where there's the bag thing. Ideally it wouldn't be a bag; it would be something nicer sounding and nicer looking, and it means that the wife doesn't. And a lot of people listen and go, "Look, my pregnancy was the best thing," and those people could still do that. But those who wanted to, focus more on their career and I guess the sort of conservative.
So you're talking about kind of like taking pregnancy out of the woman's body,
yes,
to make it more convenient or more.
Yeah, and I know that sounds soulless and horrific and anti-family and all of those things. I totally understand.
I think it sounds pro-family because it's talking about creating children in a different way so that there could be more of them, presumably. So it wouldn't be quite so.
That's true, and people might have more children, if they didn't have to go through that 9 months and all. So I guess we'll have to see how science goes. But you wouldn't want to be one of the first generations to sign up to that.
I would be concerned about the child in that situation. So what we know about mother-baby bonding obviously taking place in utero, and how this is ignored and put aside in surrogacy, in that kind of dehumanized way. What about so the child is born, so the child doesn't have a mother?
Well, the mum comes to like every week, you'd go in, look at, he's grown and all of that.
I think that's a film. I think I've seen that's a film.
I'm sure. Well, they should pay me for the idea.
Yeah.
I've got one more question for you. Where can people find you and follow you? Okay,
so we're on Twitter, which is @wombsnotforrent, and our website is stopsurrogacynow.org. And anyone can contact us. We'd like to hear from anybody who's been a surrogate mother, who has regret, who doesn't, who wants to talk to us. We engage with people of different views, and we're happy to hear from anybody who's watching and wants to get in touch.
We'll put the links below. Who is a heretic you admire?
So this was tricky for me. I'd like to ask if I can give 2. Can I be greedy and give 2?
Yeah.
So Renata Klein is an author of a book that's called Surrogacy, A Human Rights Violation, which is fantastic. It's a really brilliant read. It explains a lot about surrogacy and why it affects human rights and why it affects women and children. And then there's also Jennifer Lal, who she's the president of the Center of Bioethics in the States, and she's a filmmaker. She's made 2 brilliant films one called Breeders, which is obviously about women being like a subclass and, certain group of women being used for surrogacy. And then she's also made a film called Exploitation, which is about the egg donor industry and some of the risks there.
Fascinating heretics. People, please go check out Lexi Ellingsworth's links and things are below, and she's been absolutely wonderful, so please do go check out and learn more about this fascinating subject. Hit the like button and keep watching this show.